to go. I think I'm ready to go. I think I'm ready to go. That's my delay. Hello there. This is the first time I've made a video for quite a while, and so as the name suggests at the bottom underneath, today is the 80th anniversary of the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima. And last year I went to Japan. It's something I'd wanted to do since I was in my mid-20s. I was 50, and I had enough money to be able to go, and so I went. It was an amazing trip. It was 28 days, 18 hotels, so it was quite a journey. And one of the things that I put in the list, I went with my friend, but one of the things on the list was to go to Hiroshima. So I might as well show you what my trip was first, just a very quick sort of idea of what happened. And so let's go to the right screen. There we go. Okay. So as you can see, it was quite a trip because these are all the hotels I stayed at. So flew into Haneda Airport. Where's it gone? There it is. So flew into Haneda Airport, Haneda Airport, and stayed at this hotel. My friend and we went down to Yokosuka because there's a naval base there, and I like military stuff, so went down there, and that was an interesting trip as well. But and we also went to the Disneyland Resort as well, which I think is this here. Yes, so I did Tokyo Disney Seas. So we spent 4 days in the Tokyo area, and then we went up north to Hakodate, and then up to Sapporo, where we stayed, and then we came back down and stayed at Amori for one night. It wasn't a trip to the city, as in we didn't see any sights other than the train station and the way to the hotel, and from the hotel to the train station. So and then it was back down on the Shinkansen train down to just short of Tokyo. So here, I think it is. Yep, on it, on here, and then it was back up here to no, that way, to Nagano, and then up here to Toyama, and then across here into this delightful little piece with glacial water, quite a wonderfully beautiful one, to Matsumoto. I wanted to go to Matsumoto for the longest time. From Nagano it was across to Nagoya, then to Kyoto, then Osaka, then straight across to Hiroshima, which is I'll talk about in a moment, then across to Fukuoka, then down to here, down to Kurume, and then went through this sort of wiggly line that even goes back on itself to Oita, and then up to Beppu. We got a ferry across up here to Iwatahama, and then from Iwatahama, where we stayed at the hotel in Matsuyama, really nice place to go as well. And then we followed the coastline up across back onto Honshu to stay at Okayama, and then across to Himeji, and from Himeji it was through to Kobe to Osaka for the second time, and then it was back up this way on the Shinkansen, and this time through Nagoya and down following the Hamamatsu route. Went to a museum at the airbase that's here, and then it was over to back up to Tokyo, and then over to here, the hotel at near Chiba, and then we went up to the airport and flew all the way down the coast to Okinawa, and had 3 days there, and then it was back to the airport at Narita, and then it was back home. Even the route was interesting because it was sort of a round the world trip. So the way that you get to Japan most of the time from the UK is to go southwest. We went from Heathrow Airport in London. So you go southeast, and you head towards Romania, and then you skirt across the bottom of the Black Sea, sort of here. Obviously they used to fly straight across, but you can't fly across Russia anymore, and you certainly can't fly across Ukraine. There's a war going on, and so then it's across through like Turkmenistan and sort of China, and then over to over Korea, and into Japan that way, into Haneda. And then on the way back, it was transpolar because we flew with Finnair, and it was across there. And I don't know if it will show, but the international date line sort of goes across this way, has like a little sort of box thing that goes like that. And so we flew over the top between Alaska and Russia. So there's Russia, there's Alaska, and we sort of flew across there, and then it was transpolar into Finland. So it was quite a trip. But so yeah, it was quite amazing. Anyway, I've been saying I'm going to make a video about it for ages, and I haven't gotten around to it, and I really should. So because I went to Hiroshima, of course, one of the things that you go to if you want to, of course, is the Hiroshima memorial, for the bomb memorial. And so I've got some pictures to share, but just to give you an idea, we're going to go back to the map. And so this is the hotel we stayed at, and this is the area that the bomb was destroyed, hit. So I'm sure you've probably seen it. This is the nuclear dome, as it's called, and the blast landed here. It dropped 600 meters above the surface, so it was a blast bomb, basically, and it destroyed basically a big space like this. I mean, it destroyed pretty much the city. So here we go. So this is some of the photos that I took, and so drain covers in Japan, they seem to have all sorts of designs on them. They're not just like sewer hole. They often have these that are displayed. Anyway, so this is a photo that I took of the nuclear dome. Let's double click that area. And there's a big plaque there, and it says, "The Abong Dome is the ruins of the former Hiroshima Prefecture Industrial Promotion Hall, which was destroyed by the first atomic bomb to be used in the history of mankind on the 6th of August 1944, not 45. The atomic bomb was detonated in the air at an altitude of approximately 600 meters, almost right above the hall. The explosion by a single bomb claimed the lives of over 200,000 people, and the city area of about 2 kilometers was turned to ashes. In order to have this tragic fact known to succeed in generations, and to make it a lesson for humankind, the reinforcement work for the ruins has been done by the contributions of many people who desire peace within and out of the country. The ruins shall be preserved forever." And that was 1967. So, and this is it. I mean, the bricks are still there. The debris. I mean, the thing that they've done is they've gone and put a sort of a metal framework to hold it all together. But other than that, it's pretty much as it was. The stones are in the same place, and it's quite visually. I mean, this was a strong building. This was, most of the buildings in Japan were wooden, and so concrete and brick buildings were you know, less common, and you know, so it's all kept nice and neat, and this gives you an idea of what the building looked like before, and this is it afterwards, and you can see the debris all the way around, and then there's the structure and the general building. I think I've taken individual pictures, so that's it from above, and then there are various piece elements. So you got, you know, the sort of birds, the peace doves, and so on. And this picture, I'll have a story for you to sort of explain things a little, but you'll sort of, it'll be referenced. So so as well as seeing the dome, went into the museum, and this gives an illustration of what it. This is a model of what it looked like before the bombing. And again, as you can see, most buildings, these are all made out of wood. There's a few here and there, you know, concrete and brick buildings. The target that the Americans were aiming for was this T-shaped bridge, and it landed approximately here, like I say, again, above the ground. So yeah, so this is a video illustration. I don't need the volume, but it kind of gives. There was another map of similar kind of thing, but it had like a smoke thing over the top of it, and it projected light on top of it, so it gave an idea. So here comes the bomb. And in an instance of, I think it was like 950 miles per hour speed of the blast. And it just decimated everything in a moment. And this gives an idea of what it looked like. So there's the T-shaped building. So that's the south, that's the north, and there's the dome building. And this area here is now all the Peace Museum area. There's another one. You can see all those buildings, just a few are left standing, you know, but everything here, this is all wooden buildings and things. The devastation was you know, quite amazing. If you look, this is what it was like on the ground level. It's frightening to see the devastation. So this is the Peace Building, and there's a flame here, and that's been that's a continual flame. So it's a commemoration thing, and various. And this says, "Mourning the lives in the first in the atomic bombing. We pledge to convey." I'm gonna have to. The ruin of. Wait a minute. Let's zoom right. The truth. The truth of this tragedy throughout Japan and the world. Pass it on to the future. Learn the lessons of history and build a peaceful world free from nuclear weapons. Hiroshima National Peace Memorial Hall for the atomic bomb victims. So one of the one of the things that is a bit awkward, and awkward is a euphemism to say the least. So, unlike Germany, who have embraced Nazism was bad, Japan hasn't really done that so much, because Japan itself wasn't invaded. They were bombed, but they weren't invaded. There wasn't any, American, British, Australians, etc., battling in the streets of Tokyo or anything like that. There was no thanks to this bomb, which is, it's ironic to say thanks to a bomb, that the war ended before an invasion took place. And, there was the Hiroshima one and then Nagasaki a few days later. Now, Japan hasn't really embraced the what we did was bad. Again, euphemism, bad. The hard part is that they don't really mention it anymore. The history books have this sort of blank space in the 1930s and 40s. They sort of don't really talk about it, because if you pretend it doesn't exist, then it's not really a thing so much. Of course, I had a Japanese friend many years ago say that the best thing that happened to Japan was having the nuclear bomb dropped on them, and you think, wow, that's a strong thing to say. But what he was basically saying is it turned Japan from a aggressive, warlike nation to a pacifist nation, and that rebuilt the country and made it one of the biggest economic powers on the planet. So rather than like America, the British, French, etc., building tanks and bombs and planes and nuclear weapons and so on, and the Cold War starting, well, Japan didn't do that. They built up their industry and started making cars and stereo and things of that nature. It's like the old Back to the Future. It's like, oh, made in Japan. What are you talking about, Doc? All the best stuff is made in Japan. So for Japan to kind of embrace, we were really bad, we were quite evil. I mean, what they did in Manchuria and Korea and things like that, it's a history that isn't forgotten for their nations, but not enough is taught to the children and passed on that. And so when you go around this museum, there's definitely a victim complex, but there's like a vague kind of there's a very vague kind of suggestion of why the bomb was dropped. It doesn't really mention why. It kind of just mentions that Japan wasn't so great, was a bit warlike, and so they ended up having a bomb dropped on them. So this is where this next picture will illustrate. So it says, let me just zoom out a bit. Okay, so at one point in the 20th century, Japan walked the path of war. Then on December the 8th, 1941, Japan initiated hostilities against the US, Great Britain and others, plunging into what became known as the Pacific War. This war was largely fought elsewhere in the Asia-Pacific region, but when the tide turned against Japan, American warplanes began bombing the homeland, and Okinawa became a bloody battlefield. Within this context of war, on the August the 6th, 1945, the world's first atomic bomb weapon, a bomb of unprecedented destructive power, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. I mean, like I say, there's a reference to, walked the path of war, and, Japan initiated hostilities against the US, Great Britain, and others, and it's like, the Chinese and the Koreans and in Indonesia and places like this, hostilities is an understatement, shall we say. So the atomic bomb dropped at 8:15 a.m. August 6, 1945, exploded at an altitude of approximately 600 meters above the city of Hiroshima. It emitted heat rays and blast and radiation. In the vicinity of the epicenter, heat from the bomb raised the surface temperatures from 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius and generated a blast that blew 440 meters per second, about 984 miles an hour. Simultaneously, an enormous amount of radiation was emitted. These three forms of energy instantly destroyed the entire city, indiscriminately taking many precious lives. Let's just zoom in a bit more. About 350,000 people are estimated to have been in Hiroshima when the atomic bomb was dropped. Among these were many from the Korean Peninsula, which was then a Japanese colony, and include persons from China. Some of these had been conscripted, Shanghai, anyway. Also present were foreign students from China and Southeast Asia and American prisoners of war. The A-bomb devastated nearly all administrative agencies and destroyed official documents. Thus, the exact number of the deaths due to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima remains unknown. Many victims were never identified. According to a document submitted by the city of Hiroshima to the United Nations in 1976 entitled "For the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons and the Reduction of All Armed Forces and All Armaments," an estimated 140,000, give or take 10,000 people died as a result of the A-bomb between the 6th of August 1945 and the end of December that year. The injuries inflicted by the atomic bomb appeared to be healing by the end of 1945, but a high percentage of those who were seen to be recovering later fell victim to vast array of after effects, including keloid scars, leukemia, and other cancers. Since 1946, thousands of people have passed away each year, and the pain and anxiety of many survivors continues. We hereby mourn those who perished in the atomic bombing. At the same time, we record with great sorrow the many lives sacrificed to a mistaken national policy. Again, it's a euphemism. Mistaken national policy. To ensure that no such tragedies are ever repeated, we pledge to convey the truth of these events throughout Japan and the world, to pass it on to future generations, to build, and as soon as possible, a peaceful world free of nuclear weapons. So yeah, it's there's a kind of like a lot of euphemisms that make a suggestion, but you can see there's a kind of like a hiding of the truth there. Japan was a victim. The people of Hiroshima were a victim, both of the bomb, but also the Japanese started it. Nuclear bomb ended it. I mean, we already had the victory in Europe in May of 1945, and this is a few months later. So yeah, but there are going around the museum. There are a number of artifacts. I didn't take many photos at all. In fact, I think I took one in the artifacts. So you've got this darkened room, and there's a sort of twisty, windy route through the artifacts. So you've got like big glass cases, and you've got like a child's tricycle, and it's all burnt and twisted, and just like smashed. You've got steel beams that have got big fractures in them. There are a picture I can show you. This one here. So you might think, well, what's special about this? So what's here is you can see the shadow of the nuclear blast. So one of the things that's there is basically a big piece of concrete, a big piece of stone, and on it you can see the silhouette of a person. The person was vaporized, and so you've got this shadow on this stone. What you might think, the whole point, the way that the shadow thing worked was effectively it's where the light couldn't get it. So if you can imagine, the bomb goes off here, someone is there, and what it did was it bleached the stone around the person. So person was stood there, their shadow against the light was not bleached by the explosion. So this is a bit like, in many cities now they've taken to sandblasting old buildings. So you've got these, like, they're all blackened and everything, but then they get the sandblaster in there and you can now see it's like a red brick or an orangey brick, or sort of tan coloured stone. And it's because they basically they've used the sandblasting abrasive to remove the black soot from vehicles. And Manchester's old enough that it's like still got the soot of steam power, and like I say, smoke from cars for like a century basically. And so with this picture, which I'll show again, so for this picture there was obviously something here around this centre square, and this is the light came from here, and because there was something there, it didn't this was all bleached by the explosion, whereas this wasn't bleached as much, I suppose, because it would go around still. And so, like I say, you can see there's the shadow. It's a bit hard to tell with that because it's like an angled piece. So I didn't take many pictures on the inside. I didn't take any pictures really on the inside. So there are 3 stories that I remember, because one of the things when you go to when you look up the Hiroshima bombing, you can go to Wikipedia and it'll tell you, so many people died, so many people got radiation and died later, but it doesn't tell you very much about the people, the survivors, the people who died. It doesn't tell you about the effects on real people. It's all statistics and numbers, and numbers don't, effectively it's quantitative but not qualitative. Best easy way to describe it. And so there are 3 stories that I remember quite vividly. So first one was a middle-aged guy, and he works in he's a cleric in a clerk in an office building, and so he's doing some paperwork, and he needs some of the files from the basement where the where the files are kept. He needs some, yeah. And so he thinks, well, shall I get my secretary to do it? Oh, she's busy. I'll go myself. So he goes down into the basement. He's looking through the files, and then boom, everything's like, the bomb goes off. Buildings like knocked over. He crawls out to a moonscape, and but there's also like the survivor's guilt kind of thing. I survived. All my colleagues in that building were killed. I was the only one that survived out in that building. And not only that, if only I'd have asked my secretary to go, because she would have survived. I was an older guy. She was still young. So she should have survived, and I should have died. So there's that kind of survivor's guilt thing going on. I thought that was, again, an element that you don't really think of. The second story is of a little girl. She was 6 when it happened. She wasn't in the city centre. She was outside, but but she got cancer in the following years, and she died aged 20. And when they did an autopsy, which she was accepting of, to show what happens, when you've been exposed to a terrible level of radiation. When they did an autopsy and they opened her up, everything, she was just riddled with cancer: brain, heart, lungs, stomach, kidneys, everything. She was just riddled with it. She died aged 20. And all her life she would have been suffering, whether it was internal things, just feeling weak and tired, and so on. So and again, you're walking around bits of ripped clothing with just like blood and stains on them, where wounds have just like shredded the skin away. And all around there are these massive pictures of people with like these horrible scars, and sort of like bloated faces where it's all blistered, and that kind of thing. And picture, some of it is artwork by people of the time, and they've drawn what they saw, their memories of the terrible effects. So you've got sort of people with their backs all red raw, and people with like barely any features, just like and then there's like the dead, just people that are like melted, melted into just like a blob. The only thing you can see is a skull, and where the eyes were and stuff like that. It was quite gruesome. My friend that I was travelling with, he probably did about maybe 5 minutes or so, and then he had to leave. He went and sat in the corridor, and me, I felt I had to go through it all to see the awful magnitude of what happened to these people. And then and the last story was, you got this young lad. He's 16. I think he was 16, might have been 15 or 14. I can't remember. Anyway, he was a young lad, just a teenager, and so he wasn't in the city, and so he came into the city because his mum was in the city, and so he went looking for her, and eventually, after hours of searching, he found her. And if you remember, I showed you the picture of the city and the river. There's areas where the steps that go down into the water, and she's like half in the water, half out of the water. She's like just terrible and sick, and she's just like splayed out on the steps like many other people. And well, this is several hours later, and yet everything's still on fire. There's just debris everywhere. Things are on fire. It's dangerous, and so well, the way to get around would be like to go down the road across a bridge, because by now there's a first aid post on the other side of the river. And so he's like, well, if I go around, it's going to be dangerous. It could take a long time to get there. And so he decides to swim across the river with his mother on his back. And so he swims across the river, and when he gets there, his mum's dead. You know, that's just a horrible thing. Getting a bit emotional now. And I felt like that going through this thing, you know, like I say, with all these bits of ripped clothes and these little stories. Yeah. So, yeah, it was not a pleasure to go through it. It really wasn't. You know, I had to. You know, it's almost like a bit macabre. You know, sort of wanting to do this, but it was almost like, you know, in order for it to be real, you've got to see what the suffering was. You know, you've got to feel it to be able to really understand it as a human being. Because again, like I say, look at Wikipedia, all you get is numbers and statistics, and you know, this happened, it happened at a certain altitude, and you know, covered an area of this, that, the other. But it doesn't tell you about the people. And so yeah, it was pretty awful to go through it. And so, you know, and another drain cover. This is from 2023, G7, and you know, so yeah, it was pretty grueling. A slight off thing was they got a tram system, and within 3 days of the bombing, they had a couple of trams running. Amazingly, they had some trams running, and they've got two of the original trams from that time, 651 and 652. Those are trams that were operating, and they're still operating now. They're more used for special occasions, but they, you know, I mean, like for example, it probably would have been used today. You know, one is like almost like a tourist thing, so it's got pictures and things like that. So it's like a mobile history lesson about the tram system and you know what happened afterwards. And so yeah, there's both of them are there. You can just can't quite see it from here, but the other one is nearby. And then there's this one here, which is not. This is one that was moved from Osaka, where there was bombing, and so they moved it to Hiroshima. But you know, this isn't really important. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to show you. That you know, there's the kind of distaste of you know, the sort of the language being, you know, the euphemistic language being used to, you know, to hide atrocity, really. And there is a victim complex, and they were victims. That is true. The people were victims. The state was a victim, but it was also a result of their activities. You know, these things don't happen in isolation, at least they shouldn't. And also, there's a little thing that kind of, you know, we've been very lucky because since the 1990s, when the Cold War ended, the threat of nuclear war went away, effectively. Yes, there were some countries like India and Pakistan who managed to acquire weapons later. Iran are you know, looking to do it as well. You know, and but those are more regional thing. So it's the idea of nuclear weapons is to act as a deterrent to stopping anybody invading. You better not mess with us or else. And I'm not making excuses here. I'm just sort of explaining how I understand it. Doesn't make it good, of course. So one of the things in nuclear proliferation is if we look at North Korea. So we have to go back to sort of 9/11 territory here. So what happened was 9/11 happens, and George Bush goes on a podium and he talks about these rogue nations like Iran and North Korea, and like Saddam in Iraq and Gaddafi in Libya are two of the other people mentioned. So let's explore what happened. So with Iraq, now whether you agree or not, with why the war was started, America and allied nations went and basically deposed Saddam, and he was eventually found hiding in a hole and was hung. So fight and you'll get killed. In Libya, Gaddafi decided to try and play ball. He decided to go make a clean slate and make a fresh start, and that appeased the Western countries, but then his enemies, the insurgents, decided that he was weak and decided to fight against him. And of course, yeah, sure, we like the idea of getting involved in their oil business and everything, but we really didn't like Gaddafi, and so therefore we helped the rebels from their point of view, and next thing you know, Gaddafi's in hiding and he gets caught and ends up getting killed. So resist, get killed. Play ball, get killed. And so if you think about North Korea, okay, we look at those two people, those two groups on that list, and didn't go well for them. What's the best deterrent to stop people coming after us? Nuclear weapons. And so that's the reason why North Korea went nuclear. It's logical, but it doesn't make it any better. So it doesn't excuse it. And again, not making excuses, just explaining the situation. Now for me, for the oh, hi Simon, how are you doing? Yes, I am doing pretty well. Something that's personal for me on this situation. So my parents were in the military, and for the first 17 years of my life, we bounced all over Europe, all over Britain, and lived in Germany for 3 years as well. So I went to 12 different schools in the first 17 years of my life. Multiple military bases. I mean, in one place we were at Wittering, we lived in 3 different homes in one place. So lived in many homes and went to many schools, and and also it was there was an interesting factor in there, which is I'm very good at making friends, not so good at keeping them, or at least it wasn't. I never used to be. Because for me, growing up with the military life, friendships were temporary things. Either you would move or they would move. It's not like the internet existed yet for for everybody. It wasn't a thing then. No such thing as social media or Friends United or Reunited or whatever. No, you had to write a letter to them, and it's easy to lose contact in that regard. And so yeah, I was very good at making friends, not very good at keeping them, because either I would move or they would move, so it was temporary. But throughout that life, we came out the Air Force in 1991. Literally, like months, just a few months in the spring of '91, a few months after the fall of the Berlin Wall and Perestroika and all that kind of stuff. So basically, the collapse of the Soviet Union happened in my last year of school. So, like I say, I grew up, living on military bases, and every single home I lived in for the first 17 years of my life was at the pointy end of a nuclear weapon. Because primary target, military bases. So, I mean, like I say, when we lived in Germany for 3 years, that was in 1983 we nearly went into nuclear war because there was an exercise, military exercise, and the Russians weren't sure whether it was real or not. This is how we ended up with the red phone to Moscow in the White House. So so that they can actually communicate. Actually, no, I don't think it was that. I think, sorry, that was from the Cuban Missile Crisis, wasn't it? But either way, we nearly ended up involved in nuclear war because the exercises were so realistic that the Russians weren't sure about whether they were going to be attacked, and so they were ready. Effectively, if you can imagine the movie thing, they flipped the plastic canopy that covers the big red nuclear button launch. It was that close. The Russians nearly pressed that button. I think it was a Russian who decided, you know what, maybe this wouldn't be a good idea. But either way, I grew up at the pointy end of a nuclear weapon for the first 17 years of my life. The worry about nuclear war went away for a long, long time. But it's back. If you look at what's going on now, Russia, basically, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the money was worthless, and it allowed, yeah, sure, money was coming in and being made, but ultimately there was so much corruption that it didn't make a lot of difference for the average person. And you've basically got a dictator in charge of Russia now. So Putin has decided he wants to get Ukraine back as a sphere of influence. How long is it going to be before we start, if that happens, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia next? One of the things that you can see here and there, let's see if I can it's not going to be happening now, almost certainly not going to be, but if I go to Flight Radar 24 right now, and so here is where you've got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and there's this thing here, this little piece here, because this here is Kaliningrad. It is a Russian enclave, so it's not that bit there and that. So this is Russia. This is Kaliningrad, and you'll see that the Russian flights go all the way around over the Baltic basically, and they fly in that way, and then they got to fly back. So that's how they get to Russia. They've got to go all the way around. They used to just fly straight over the top, but no longer. And this, they don't fly over Belarus either. But I doubt they'll be there now. But this is the Suwalki Gap there, and if you go and look here tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow during the day, you'll frequently find these are Turkish Airlines. That's Pegasus, more Pegasus. Yeah, it's dark now. Nothing's going to happen. But frequently you'll find a little plane like this, and they're sort of floating around this area here, and they're spy planes. They're basically listening to, watching Belarus and Russia, and they're monitoring the situation, because if Russia does, wins against Ukraine and their next target are these ones here, all they have to do is blockade that, and there is no land access. Everything would have to be flown in, or and so on. So it makes life very difficult. And one of the things that is happening right now is in airports in these areas. They've got what they call air policing. So it's the Baltic Air Policing, and different NATO members will put pilots, and basically they'll have fighter planes ready to protect, and they're on something called QRA, Quick Response Alert. So the bell goes, they're up in like 2 minutes, they're in the sky, and watching any Russian military that come along. And the same thing happens, they go over the top of this place here, like north of Sweden, and they fly sort of this Greenland, Iceland, Scotland kind of an area, and they fly through here, and they get monitored all the way around the coast, and they'll fly across there, and they'll go all the way down to Cuba. And then there's other similar things happening on the Black Sea as well. Again, probably nothing there right now. Yeah, there's nothing there now, but they're a little bit north. Still okay, but normally the skirt a little bit lower down. It's like I mentioned earlier at the start, there's this is the route that goes across for the east, and these are the ones that go towards Japan. And that's how in fact, wait a minute, did I see Channel 42? No, that's 90. Let's have a look. This was the flight that I took. No, it's not in the air at the moment. That's the return one, Tokyo to London. But yeah, it's not in the air right now. Let's have another look. I don't know how you do that then. No. Oh, it doesn't matter. Not important. So, yeah. Oh, actually, this will show what I meant before. When I came home, we went north and skirted across the edge here and along this bit down there, and that's how we got back over the pole into Finland and Helsinki, which is down here. So yeah, it was in theory an around the world trip, because we did go over the international date line. We went over it and then came back, but it was still quite amazing. And you can see how busy Japan is right now. You know. So, yeah, I actually enjoy watching these. The ones I like best are the Fuji Dream Airlines. Let's have a look, see if I can find them. All the small ones. There's bound to be one up here somewhere. There we go. So, and every single airplane they have is a different colour. Just a fun little fact for you. Find another one. You'll see what I mean. There's another one. There you go. See, that's the pink one. So, just a little silly witticism. Anyway, I'm rambling on, and you know, that's not necessary. So yes, you know, I thought I'd give just a little slightly different insight to the rest of the because I've been there, and by being there, it shows the you know, just to give a I don't know, I'm rambling. Ultimately, I had a slightly different insight than most people did because I went to that museum, and you know, like I say, seeing all the pictures of, you know, gruesome pictures of melted people, and you know, obliterated buildings, and you know, stained clothing, you know, just you know, things like clocks or watches that had stopped at the time this happened. You know, so you know, those clocks forever stopped, and I suppose will forever be around. The question is, can we learn these lessons? Can we learn, you know, the problem is it's a difficult one. You know, how do we actually get rid of nuclear weapons? Is Russia and America gonna say, you know what, yeah, I mean, you know, they've done partial nuclear disarmament, but you know, that's like partial circumcision. You know, it's a quote from Robin Williams. You know, partial nuclear disarmament is ridiculous. You know, that's like having partial circumcision. You know, you should go all the way, or you just don't bother. And you know, well, how do we have an agreement of how much we'll do? How many secret nuclear weapons do we have? How many weapons have been built since, and you know, aren't you know, on the list of you know, how many? Is there a tally that all sides can look at and say, yeah, we really should be getting rid of these things, we should find, you know, other solutions? But the problem is, would North Korea want to give up its nuclear weapons, knowing you know, what happened to Saddam, and knowing what happened to Libya, you know, Gaddafi? You know, how do you persuade them to give them up? How do you come to an agreement? There are too many things that are separate, and to be honest, it's getting worse. If you think about it, we came together quite well for a while, and now, if you only have to look at the politics, look at the politics of my country, look at the politics of America. You know, the attitude is, you're with us or you're against us. You know, there's a war against woke, Which I always find an amusing phrase, because it's like, as opposed to what? As opposed to being asleep. I don't know about anybody else, but I do all my thinking when I'm awake. I make all my rational decisions when I'm awake, not when I'm asleep. But look at the polarization of America's politics. The idea of compromise, of two parties having different opinions and coming together and say, okay, can we find a middle ground that both of us can walk away satisfied? It's harder and harder to see it. I see, Republicans just say, no, my way or the highway. We've got the control of the House and the Senate, and therefore we can just do what we want. Oh, and by the way, we're going to just let Donald Trump do what he wants. There's a really interesting thing, actually. It's different. It's sort of related, but on a tangent. So I remember I went to college and learned history, and when I was reading history, we were doing the Cold War, and one of the differences in the history that I was doing, that compared to what I'd learned before, was that it was more political intrigue rather than kings and queens and battles. It wasn't about battles, because effectively battles are the end result of disagreement and politics gone wrong. When politics go wrong, that's when they send in the military and conquer lands, or prevent other nations from being able to do it. Although strangely, we don't seem to want to do that in Gaza right now. It's I see similarities with it's not a topic. That's a completely different topic. I should maybe cover it another day. But to sort of go on that tangent I was mentioning, so studying about Vietnam, and there was something that I can't remember now. I can't remember who it was, but basically there was a South Korean politician, and he wasn't towing the American line of suggesting the idea of maybe coming to a compromise with North Korea to try and stop the war. And so they decided that this wasn't on, so that the CIA embarked on a mission to discredit the guy. And so what they did was they sort of made strong suggestions that he was having an affair with, even though he was married, he was having an affair with younger women. Now, for an American politician at that time, the sheer suggestion of infidelity, that just gossip, spreads its own truth, shall we say. And so just the suggestion of impropriety, and that politician would resign. And yet, but the idea backfired, because it turned out that in Vietnam at that time, I mean it was the 60s, that you're getting it off with with younger women even though you're married. Well done you, kind of thing. It wasn't the career-ending scandal that it would have been in America for an American politician. So as a result, effectively it just didn't happen. It didn't work. And so, but if we look at the present day with Donald Trump, the whole grab 'em by the pussy thing, it made no difference at all, really, because ultimately, it's like, well, yeah, that's the kind of thing he does. That's what we expect from him. That's what we like about him. I don't know about that, but you know, that's what you expect from Donald Trump. Going into women dressing rooms you know, because he owns the pageant, you know, the beauty pageant. Just walking in, you know, the whole thing that's going on right now with you know, the I've forgotten his name now. Thingy Stein. Oh my gosh, I've forgotten his damn name. Oh, crying out loud! Why have I forgotten his bloody name? Epstein. Epstein. So the whole Epstein thing that's been going on, you know, it's like I can conceive a situation where he's trying to hide it right now, but maybe he did sleep with women that were, you know, underage. They were 16 or whatever. And you know what? I think even if that, you know, even if it was revealed that, oh shit, he, you know, Trump would, even if he knew, he would probably lie and just say, well, I was told she was 18. You know, and Trump's base will just go, lots of women, lots of 16-year-olds look like they're 18. You know, you don't find out till later. You know, they're not. This has happened time and time again. We will pretend it's not an important thing. So again, you know, the scandal just doesn't really exist anymore. So, but that again, it kind of relates to the Hiroshima thing. You know, Hiroshima was basically, you know, when politics breaks down and wars start, and it ends up, you know, ending. You know, it's a failure. How would we, you know, how would we be able to get rid of nuclear weapons unless everybody agrees to do it? But the problem is they then leave themselves open for alternative ways of killing each other. And it's bizarre because what we've gone and created is an us and them mentality. We're now going into philosophy. It's, you know, they are the other, and whether the other are transgender people or the immigrants or the Russians or Ukraine or, you know, North and South Korea, you know, Iran and Israel and Gaza, you know. One of the things I learned as a part of history, we did Nazism, and there was something called radical extremism. Radical, I forgot what it is now. Radical. Basically, it's an escalation. Radical. I've forgotten the phrase, but effectively the idea is that you know, that the Nazis like, the Jews are terrible and they're the awful people, we need to deal with them. So what we'll do is we'll blockade their shops and they won't be able to, you know, do that. And then it goes to you know, we'll shut them up in an area, a ghetto, you know, and they'll, you know, like a sort of you know, a prison camp, you know, district, and then you know, and then it goes into like, yeah, well, you know, we'll export them to Madagascar. Oh, that's not really going to work. Okay, well, we got to get rid of them. We got to get, you know, we don't want them here, and so that's, next thing you know, it's death camps. You know, well, it's death camps via driving them around in trucks with the exhaust going, you know, into it. Into, you know, a cabin on the back of it. You just drive them around for a bit and they'll just die from asphyxiation. You know, I mean, you know, it's a radical escalation kind of thing. It just like one step to another, to another, to another, and as you go down that line, oh, let's try again. As you go down, it just leads to atrocity. We look what we've got now. with Gaza. These people are the enemy. We need to do something about them. We're going to blockade them inside this little bit of land, you know, if we're not already taking it from them, which is like the West Bank. We're gonna, we're gonna, nothing can go in or out without our say so. They've done this terrible atrocity against us. We're now going to have to target them all, you know, and so, you know, there's this weird thing that they've done. They use AI to do it, but effectively it's anybody who has anything to do with someone in a mass. So, you know, a third cousin who barely ever speaks to anybody, but they know someone who knows someone on Facebook, so they're now a target, and so are their children, because they'll just wait until they go home because they can be sure they're going to stay there for a while, you know. And you can see, we can hear the language from different ministers and Netanyahu and so on, and they're just saying about, we're going to take it all. We're going to take over it all. There can't be a threat if we take it all from them. We'll just, they'll we'll make them so desperate they'll just want to leave. They'll want to leave, otherwise they'll just die. We've already tried. We're already starving them, so they're gonna. It's not going to be long until they want to leave, and we'll allow them to leave. They can go to Jordan. They can go to to the deserts of Egypt or somewhere. How's that any different than trying to send it to Madagascar? And the rest of them that won't go? That's a ... What's the next stage? And we can hear politicians saying there are no uninvolved Gazans. So even babies, they're the potential next generation of extremists, freedom fighters or, terrorists, and we don't want them to grow up to be terrorists, so we can just kill them as well. This is the kind of language that is being used now, and it's how you end up, demeaning other people, and it's so much easier to kill them when you do that. We saw it with the Nazis. The Japanese did a similar thing. I remember when I first got into Japanese stuff back in the early 2000s, or late 90s, sorry, and I learned something that apparently the Japanese sorry isn't a very strong answer. So basically, Japanese people did awful things, including terrible conditions for POWs, British, Australian, etc. Politicians in the sort of China, Burma, India and area, and sort of like other parts of the sort of Southern Asia Pacific area and so on. Now I'm going to say something here, and I don't want people to misunderstand. I am not supporting anything at all. I'm more explaining the situation. Okay, so I'm not making excuses. There's no apologetics here. I'm not saying it's all right. I'm just explaining how things get from one thing to the next. So the way that the Japanese military had, sort of generally, like built themselves up as like that, almost the master race kind of thing. They're superior people. They were using the Bushido spirit of like the samurai and things of that nature. Now, for the Japanese, they were taught that surrender was the maximum shameful thing you could possibly do. That it is better to kill yourself than be captured. So you should either fight to the death, or take your own life if you're not going to succeed. And there are, and to the point that there are Japanese, soldiers that a few of them are still alive today, fewer as the time goes on. But 25 years ago, there was still quite a lot. But there were soldiers that they had been completely disowned by their family. They didn't, that this person didn't do, this family member didn't do the honourable thing. They didn't take their own life. And so they just didn't speak to them. They were disowned completely. So if you can imagine when, you look at the Bridge on the River Kwai or something like that movie, when the British, Australians, etc., the British services, when they were in a situation where they couldn't win, the idea of, an honourable defeat was perfectly acceptable. I mean, not desirable, of course, you want to win, but, better to survive than to, to die for a hopeless cause that you can't win because there's not enough bullets or guns or air support or whatever. People are sick and, so on. It's the jungle, after all. So Far East prisoners of war, there's such a thing as an honourable defeat, and you whistle, the tune on the Bridge of the River Kwai. No, that's a different one. But, you whistle your way to the prison camp. And, but from the Japanese mentality, the soldier mentality is, these people are without honour. They don't deserve to be treated well. They didn't do what they should have done. And again, they're looking at it from their point of view. So from the British services point of view, honourable defeat is a thing. Japanese, there's no such thing as an honourable defeat. You either win or you take your own life because of the shame of losing. And so, because they didn't do what was honourable, they are without honour, and therefore it's easier to brutalise them. Now again, I understand the mentality from both sides. I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. I mean, I certainly think that honourable defeat is better than killing yourself. But either way, the Japanese didn't like the idea of POWs because they're not honourable people. So yeah, it was a different situation, I suppose. POWs from fighter planes, that were shot down, those were POWs as well. But anyway, it's a rambling thing. So ultimately, you've got to look at it from both sides of the fence. And unfortunately, we are creating an us and them attitude. And, it worries me because I'm transgendered and there's immigrants and then there's trans people. We are the, second only to the immigrants as the target of culture wars and hate. And that's so yeah, it's a terrible it's a terrible situation, because whether it's politics or whether it's countries, either way, people are becoming, the wedges are pushing people apart rather than bringing them together. I'd always been an optimist of the idea of people coming together. I'm like a bit Star Trek nerdy in this regard, and it's Cold War collapses. The Cold War isn't a thing anymore. The danger of nuclear weapons wasn't a thing anymore, and the EU starts becoming a bigger thing, you know, and you know, hopefully people will start coming together. And it was sort of going that way, and then all of a sudden it goes back the other way. You know, because people are now talking about woke and, you know, stuff like that. It's a ridiculous position. It's a ridiculous state of affairs. That, you know, why is it that so many people are focused on the things that are different than the things we got in common? You know, why is it that we want to focus on, you know, what's different about immigrants or trans people or Democrats or straight Republicans or, you know, or Labour, Conservative, stroke Reform, you know, those sorts of things. Why is it? Yeah, I know what you mean. Yes, I'm glad I don't live in America. I have actually said that I will not go to any US state that has any anti-trans legislation on their books in action. I just won't go. You know, I'd like to. I'm into aircraft. I like the US Navy stuff. I've got a bunch of model airplanes on my wall behind my screen, and you know, US Navy stuff. I'd love to go to the Pensacola Air Museum. You know, the Navy Museum. I'd love to go there, but I can't, because going to Florida and being trans, how dare I? You know, and again, like has happened with Gaza, the far-right extremists look at the Palestinians and go, they're just unworthy people. They should be eliminated. And then you get the gender critical, shall we say, and the transphobes who are, you know, saying these are awful people, they're a danger to women and girls, you know, like creating bathroom bills. They're looking at doing that in the UK, of creating a bathroom bill against trans people. And, you know, and it's like, but why? Because ultimately, and it's a deep conversation, and I'm going to make it a very, very short one. Why should I be not allowed to go and take a pee in the women's bathroom? That's who I am. That's where I should go. And what am I going to do? I'm going to go in the door. I'm going to go in a cubicle, close and lock the door, sit down, go to the toilet, wipe away, redress myself, unlock, open the door, use the sink, and leave. Might pop some new lipstick on or something, but whatever the case, you know, that's it. Why should that be a crime? Because the ultimate point is, even if there was a trans person, which is like incredibly rare, a trans person that wants to molest women and girls, it's still against the fucking law. Molesting people is against the law. You know, you basically deal for people for the crimes they do, not because of what they are. And it's an element that people just don't seem to understand. They don't seem to have picked up the difference between, you know, I mean, whenever you look at this stuff, all you have to do is change the word to black. You know, effectively, it's creating an apartheid kind of mentality. You look at the Southern American states back in the 50s. You know, the Jim Crow laws and all that kind of stuff, you know, where you've got, you know, black people aren't allowed to go into white toilets. You change you change it black to trans people. Where's the difference? It's all discrimination. It's still discrimination. You change the words from trans to black, and and it becomes quite clear. The most crazy thing that we've had in this country, and I know supposed to be talking about Hiroshima, but I'm on a roll. The most crazy thing that's happened in the last few years, there is a transphobe called Maya Forstater. They like to call themselves gender critical, but it's just a synonym for transphobes. Okay, trans people equals bad, and that's it. They don't, So we've got something called the Equalities and Human Rights Committee. So it's equalities and human rights. They're the watchdog. So basically, if you've got businesses or government and they're doing the wrong kind of thing, then they can write reports and that gets fed through and so on. And they're a watchdog. They're not owned by they're not run by the government, but the head of the EHRC is chosen by usually the Women and Equalities Minister. So a few years ago, was it 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, they appointed a transphobe as the head of the EHRC. Okay, and during her administration a few years ago, she got one of the EHRC equalities lawyers and sent them to court to get gender critical transphobia, gender critical, as a protected class under the Equalities Act, under the belief part, so religion and so on, religion and belief. Could you imagine if the EHRC had sent an EHRC lawyer to get Jew critical for a Nazi, or Muslim critical for Tommy Robinson, or for that matter, immigrant critical for the Proud Boys or something. I mean, it's the EHRC helped make transphobia legal. What the fuck? It's astounding. So, oh my gosh. Religious people, go away. I don't care about your religion. Believe what you want, but, yeah. Be concerned if you were the preacher. Yeah. It's amazing that there's a thread that there's a hashtag that went around on Twitter, which is it's like and I think it was like not a trans person or something like that, and it basically came out like preacher molests children at church, religious worker help molest children at work. I don't give a shit. Let's hide user from this channel. There we go. Bye. It has nothing to do with the topic at hand. Although I did bring up preachers, so actually, if we're going to follow that, it's amazing how, according to the Bible, Jesus says, love your enemy. And Jesus says, and the Bible says, treat foreigners in your midst with respect and love, and, care for them in the same way you would care for someone, of your own tribe. And yet, it's those evangelicals that are like, no, Muslims, no, immigrants, let's send them all to El Salvador. I don't understand it. Again, it's that, if you demean people, it's so much harder to brutalise them. And ultimately to kill them. That's what happens. We have, we've had the incident, we've had a history of it, with Nazism, and we're seeing it with Gaza right now. And it's not like we haven't had the warning in history. Yes, we have had the warnings in history, from history. Why are we still doing these things? Why are we, let's just look at the Rwanda genocide. Why is it that you got two tribes that hate each other so much that they try to kill each other? Why is it that they're so focused on the things that they don't agree on rather than the things they do agree on? That, they want to feed their families and, be happy. Why is it those things are the things that are, we pretend aren't important, and the things that we disagree on seem to be the ones that need to be wedged apart? No. This is something that should drive us apart rather than bring us together. Gonna have to go to Arnie in Terminator 2. It's in your nature to kill yourself, to kill each other. And that's, and we saw it 80 years ago with the Hiroshima bomb. And we're in danger of doing it again. I think that's the best way to finish this video. So thank you for watching. I hope people are having a good time, having a enjoyable day. The weather has been quite reasonable here. It's been a bit stormy, but apparently it's going to be nice for the next couple of days. I will be taking part in Manchester Pride at the end of the month, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to dye my hair in time because you can see how grey I'm looking at the moment. The colours coming out. So yeah, it's I'm starting to look a bit my age. I'm fortunate. I've actually done quite well in terms of my skin. I've seen people that are 51 and they look like they're 10 years older than me. I'm 51. I've always found it weird when alleged heterosexual dudes get hyper-focused on gay or trans people. Okay. I was just about to finish. What have you done here? You've opened the Pandora's box. You've started me talking again. Okay. There is a psychology test that was done, or a number of years ago, probably like 20 or 30 years ago, something like that. So what they did was they were testing to see about homophobic people. And so what they did was they tested a whole bunch of people and they put a question, gave them a questionnaire on what you think about homosexuality. And the people that were like most against it, how tolerant are you? 0. The people who were the most against it were invited to stage 2. And what they did for the guys is they put a device around their penis, and they made them watch homoerotic porn. And the ones that were the most homophobic seemed to get strangely aroused by gay porn. The lady doth protest too much, as they say. So, yeah, there is a correlation. And of course, there's also, I believe, I don't know, I've never watched porn. Okay, people don't know this. I'm asexual, not interested in having sex, never had sex, not interested, still a virgin. I'm happy with that. I don't think it's shameful. Okay? So, porn would do nothing for me. I think I've seen porn maybe 3 or 4 times ever, and number 1 was when I was a kid, and there was this tape, at the back of the drawer under the TV, videotape, and I put it on. It's like the Farmer's Daughter or something. I don't know. I can't remember. It was, like 45 years ago, something like that now. And now I was probably about 8 or something, maybe, when I saw that. Anyway, it's like, what is this? This is rubbish. This isn't cartoons, and it's not anything interesting either. So I just took it out and put it away. So I think I might have watched a porn tape before they started doing anything. And the only other times that I've seen it has been when I've been on a YouTube channel and it's been porn bombed. So that's the nearest I've ever seen. Not my bag. If it works for you and it makes you happy, fine. As long as no one else is being exploited for it, I don't have a problem. But so yeah, there's this. My favourite one. I've had abuse from. I got some local kids that keep giving me abuse. Okay, and I heard them calling me gay. Or gay boy, and it's like, okay, it doesn't hurt me. Because calling me names doesn't really upset me at all. It really doesn't bother me. I mean, it's like annoying, but doesn't really do anything to me because, words never hurt me kind of thing. Allegations, that's different. But, so calling me gay boy makes me internally laugh because, number one, I'm asexual, so not gay. 2, not a boy. So all it does is it just tells me who they are. It doesn't say anything about me. It only tells you about them. They're just trying to get a rise out of me. It's ridiculous. I had a street preacher who saw me and men who want to be women. It's like, okay, gloves come off. Because my approach when it comes to street preachers, I'm an atheist. I'm not an anti-theist, though. My approach is, if it works for you and, if it's a you thing. You keep it to yourself. I don't care. It's up to, I'm a live and let live kind of person, laissez-faire. But when they're on the street saying, you better do what my God says or else, well, gloves off time, I know the Bible well, and one of them, I said, do you think slavery is acceptable? No, it's not. I said, well, that's not what your Bible says. Your Bible gives you the rules for slavery. No, it doesn't, he said. I said, yeah, it does. Exodus 21. Read it out to us. Okay, I will, he says. So he goes flicking through the pages and he gets to there and he does a very quick skim and says, I'm not reading all that. I said, what do you mean? It's not even a page. Don't worry, because by now there's 40 people watching this back and forth. Or maybe 30, but still a number of people around watching this. And I said, don't worry, I've got that bit memorised. If a man goes in alone, he leaves alone. If he goes in with his wife, his wife goes with him. But on the 7th year, when he goes to go free, he can go with his master to the door or the doorpost of the temple and say, I love my wife, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children, I do not want to go free, and they stick it all through his ear, and he becomes his master's property forever. If you've seen Matt Dillahunty, he does a version of this. The crowd watching, they were aghast. They'd never read that bit of the Bible before. It was all the happy Jesus-y stuff, that they get, the Christianity rather than the Old Testament stuff. And, so it's like, but the bit that made me laugh is he said I was committing a sexual sin. I said, I'm asexual, I've never had sex, I'm not interested in having sex. How can I be committing a sexual sin when I'm literally not having sex? And I watched his eyes buffer, as in, oh, I've never heard that one before. And all he could do was raise the Bible and say, we're all sinners to God. And I said, did you notice how he completely ignored what I said? And, and everybody laughed at his avoidance. It was quite hilarious, actually. And it actually, the last bit of it came as a reward for me because there was a young trans lad next to me. He was about 15 or something. And he, when I was stopped, he was talking as well. And so, it's like, right, I've got to go now. I've got stuff to do. And so I stepped back. And, a girl, about 15 or something, she pushed her way through the crowd. So I said, you were fantastic. Can I give you a hug? It's like, oh, kind of thing. That was nice. But the young lad next to me said, like, we're going to go for a drink. Do you want to join us? Oh, I'd love to, but I've got a thing I'm doing, so I'm afraid I can't. And so, like, we shook hands. And, you know, his handshake was a little bit feeble, if you know what I mean. And so I said, look, like, you know, that's not a very blokey handshake. Let me show you how to do a blokey handshake. And it's kind of like you do a bit of a nod, you know, sort of kind of thing. And you shake and you grip a bit, but not tight, you know, just a fair grip. You know, and it's sort of a bit of a shake, and that's it. And I felt like it was like, you know, passing on the baton to him, you know, like the blokiness that I was getting rid of, that I was shedding away, and I was giving him something. And I suppose in a way every manly handshake he made after that time, I mean, he probably would have been like 20, he's in his, you know, mid-20s by now, I suppose. No, it can't be that long ago because it's been 6 years, 6.5. You know, so yeah, it's been about 6 years since then. But you know, like I say, either way, I just, you know, every handshake he gives, you know, so there's that sort of thing. So it came with a sort of bonus on the end. But no, I think one of the reasons why people, you know, especially guys, hate trans people is because it's that emasculation that they sort of think, you know, basically they think with their penises, and the idea of someone like me wanting to get rid of it, not wanting that, how dare you? Because, you know, if you think about, you know, strong women, basically they're trying to be like men, and that's going for men as the optimal. Whereas why would you want to be anything less than a man? Why would you demean yourself? And I think that's where the root of it comes, you know, that emasculation, or even they sort of like, oh God, I can't imagine emasculating myself, you know, because like I say, they think and they need their Willie to be able to do anything with their lives, you know. So yeah, I've gone way off topic, you know. So you know, but anyway, the point is, we need to start bringing people together rather than the whole divide and conquer thing. You know, we've done dividing and conquer to death, shall we say, and we really shouldn't be doing that anymore. We should think about a future, like I say, I know it's a bit hippie, but, you know, Star Trek future where people start coming together as one planet, you know, because as soon as we start giving up those weird ideas of this is where you belong and this is where I belong, and how dare you try to come into my sphere of belonging, you know, that is unacceptable. Why is it unacceptable? You know, why is it that we can't, you know, bring up you know, people all over the world to be their best, you know, to be the best people they can be, to have the farms in, you know, the best places for the farm people to work the farms in the best places, and, you know, and for money to not be the driving force for everything that we do, because this is one of the things that we have a problem with. I see it especially in America, where the idea of sick pay and paid days off, you know, it's like, days off? Why would you want days off? And you look at Europe and the amount of paid days off you get, the amount of holiday time that you get compared to America is just obscene. You know, it's like, what? You expect me to, you know, to work every day, all day? No. You know, the idea of quality of life has been forgotten in all of these discussions. Quality of life, and whether it's my life or your life or their lives or anybody else's life, surely it should be about the quality of life, not the inequality of life. I think that's where I'm going to end it now, because you know, otherwise I'll go on a tangent and a rant and so on. So I am going to go now. I'm going to stop, and like I say, I'm glad you came along. If you enjoy this video, don't forget, give it a thumbs up if you like, give me a subscribe if you like. You know, I think I had a really wonderful time. I started this conversation and I showed my trip around Japan. It was 28 days, 18 hotels, and it was lovely. And so I think I should make a video about that. I keep saying I'm going to, but you know, just setting up, my computer broke and had to be reinstalled and everything, so all my OBS settings went down and I had to do everything again. And you know, video games that I had set up with stuff, I've now got to change all the, you know, get the joystick and set all the binds for it and stuff like that. It's you know, so it was just too much effort. And so now I'm going to go. So like I say, hopefully maybe soon I will make a video talking about my trip around Japan. Like I say, such a wonderful time. So thank you for watching. Enjoy your the rest of your day if you still have one left, because here in Manchester in the United Kingdom it's 1:47 in the morning. But America's still up for a few more hours yet, and so I hope you enjoy the rest of your week as a good one, and